Hello, and welcome to the Tracie Austin Show, where we bring you the truth about the paranormal, the supernatural, and the highly strange. Without further delay, your host, Tracie Austin.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Tracie Austin, and we have another really great show for you today. But first, if you've not yet subscribed to our show at the YouTube channel, we would love for you to hop on over there and subscribe, follow us, follow our shows and support us. We would really greatly appreciate that. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Now, our show today, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and what my favorite subject is UFOs. And I've had sightings since 1987. And I'm sure that some of you at home have had sightings as well, and probably more than one. There are obviously some of you that have never seen anything and are totally skeptical. And that is totally fine. That's absolutely fine, because you know what? Being a skeptic is healthy, and it is good to question. However, after you've seen today's show, we hope that you will be a little bit more open to concluding that we are indeed being visited by someone from somewhere else. And we're going to be talking with Wilbur Allen, who is a former White House Air Force engineer for the ABC News. So let's go ahead and talk with Wilbur and find out more of what he has to say. Hi there, Wilbur. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Tracie. How are you? Thank you for having me.
You are most welcome. I'm excited to talk with you tonight. So, first of all, you are a former White House Air Force One engineer for ABC News. Okay.
Yes, I am.
So you've led quite an exciting career.
I've had a really robust career, to say the least. I've got 4 U.S. presidents as job references on my resume.
That's fantastic. Who are those presidents? I know Bush is one of them.
Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and William Carter.
Okay.
William Clinton.
William Clinton. I got to ask you, who's your favorite?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. And why is that?
First, he had a more open-minded perspective on how the way the country should be run. And, he treated me with the utmost respect and gave me a position in which I could work freely in his presence, not only in the White House and on board Air Force One.
Yeah, he seems like a really classy guy.
He was absolutely classy. He's probably the most classy president that we've ever had, including, I would have to say, Donald Trump. But yeah, he's more,
Really?
in fact, more glamorous than Donald Trump.
Right, yes.
In the real tip. Absolutely.
Right. Who was your worst? Who was your less favorite, I should say?
Bill Clinton, because of the unnecessary things that I had to deal with. For example, in my tenure in working in the White House, while Bill Clinton was in office, he was dealing with the Monica Lewinsky issue, and most of my time was spent chasing Monica Lewinsky. So for me,
Really?
even though it was quite lucrative, it wasn't quite fun to say that my tenure working in the White House with Bill Clinton was chasing Monica Lewinsky with a video camera.
So when did you retire, Wilbur?
I didn't really retire. What happens is we are contractors, and usually what happens is we take these jobs as contractors. My security clearance is still intact. So what I did was laterally move over from being behind the camera to in front of the camera and took a on-air position on MTV, My Big Redneck Vacation, and a few other TV shows along the way.
So I'm just curious then, Wilbur, being a former Air Force One engineer to the White House, did you ever have any conversations with those 4 presidents about UFOs?
Well, not directly. Ronald Reagan had a summit in, I couldn't remember the location of it, but it was with the Russian president at the time.
Gorbachev, right?
Gorbachev, exactly.
Yep.
And the issue was, at one point, there were 2 issues that happened, not just in the United States, but a similar issue transpired in Russia, where an object was seen outside a nuclear silo And in both situations, in both locations, both Russia and the United States, the nuclear missiles went into engage mode without anyone actually putting them into engage mode. So it was something that they had to deal with seriously, because what they had initially assumed was that aliens had taken over those missile silos, and aliens were essentially about to start the next major world war.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you, when you were 5 years of age and you lived in the UK, you actually had a face-to-face confrontation with a group of grey ETs.
It was my family indeed, and we were stationed at a base called RAF Sculthorpe, which is right outside of Sheringham.
And I know it,
And
Scunthorpe.
ah, yes, it's notorious. First of all, it's a joint base with both the United States and the Royal Air Force, and it was also a base which stored nuclear weapons at that time. And it was also a base that was heavily visited by unusual objects, which were never necessarily reported at that time. But in my encounter, what I encountered as a child, walking into my room, were small humanoid extraterrestrials dressed in silver spacesuits, and they had the characteristics exactly what we would consider as grays. They had very gaunt facial characteristics, and I could hear their thoughts. And they didn't say things to me, but I could hear what they were thinking.
All telepathic.
All telepathic.
What was the message? Did you get a message?
I didn't really understand any of it, because keep in mind, I was 5 years old at the time, and for me to see an extraterrestrial, seeing how I'd never seen an extraterrestrial before, and my thing was cartoons, and I watched cartoons as a kid, so I didn't know what aliens were until I saw this thing, these things, rather. And there were several of them that was interesting. They were all similar in characteristics, and I could remember this as if it happened yesterday. It's something you never forget when you have an encounter of this nature.
Right.
But as they came towards me, I recalled my legs didn't work. I also recalled that I couldn't scream because my vocal cords were also inhibited.
Yes.
But what was interesting was, as they approached me, I blacked out. But a short time afterwards, I would say about a week or two later, I started vomiting, which no one could figure out why. I was vomiting nightly, and I vomited nightly for about 7 or 8 years. So I vomited nightly, trying to reject whatever it was they put into me.
Mm-hmm. Did you go to the doctor and get this sorted out?
We did. Keep in mind, at the time, we're talking about a level of technology, especially in the medical field, when in the 1960s, it would be easily to consider medicine to be close to quackery or witch doctor level technology, because basically at the time that I went to the medical procedures that I had to go through on a military basis, the most advanced technology they had were X-ray machines, which would take a picture in an X-ray piece of negative, and you'd have to look at the negative. So it wasn't MRIs or any CAT scans or anything like that at that time, and they didn't have the technology to deal with implants in an area in which my implant was placed.
So you do have an implant?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ever speak to my dear friend Dr. Roger Lear about that?
Dr. Lear was a friend of mine, and in fact we talked about it, but the issue I'm having with this is I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing in terms of having these objects land in front of me and allowing me to photograph them, both photographically and with video camera. So it would be to my advantage not to have it removed, because I'm not finding anything contrary other than what I'm dealing with being to an abstract nature. There's nothing actually wrong with it. It's actually exhilarating. I enjoy it.
Right. Where is it placed in your body, do you want to say?
It's in my head.
It's in your head. Okay.
Yes.
That's the only contact you've had with those beings when you were 5?
No, they periodically showed up. In fact, I would say that my last encounter with these specific entities that I dealt with as a child was in 2005. And we're talking, my initial contact was in 1962.
Right.
So we're dealing with essentially the same entities, so to speak, and once you are tagged with these entities, you're not necessarily left alone. It's something that's ongoing, and as I was growing as a child, I can recall several encounters in my room with these entities that would beam in the same manner that people would beam in on Star Trek, almost like transporter technology.
That's right.
So
and as it said,
constant.
Yeah, as it said, Wilbur, it's really, with this whole abduction thing, it's from the cradle to the grave.
It is exactly. It's not something that What bothers me is there are a lot of people that claim to have these experiences and they don't have any actual samples to associate with these experiences other than CGI and artistic renditions of what they claim to have happened. But it's a different thing when you start getting things at a forensic level, and I can show you 1,600 samples of an object. And regardless to the number of samples that I do have, it's still something that's hard to swallow because most people want them to look like spacecraft that you see in Star Wars or the Millennium Falcon, whatever the ship is called. You want it to be something that Hollywood has predetermined that spacecraft should look like.
Right.
And then the realities of things, they are far from what Hollywood has made them to be.
Right, exactly. And you have all of those X-rays and MRIs, so the object you can see clearly. It's metallic and it's there?
Well, not really sure what substance it's made of because it's actually almost safe to say that it is non-reflective, at least at the X-ray level. And when a doctor in the military did try to remove it, as I recall, when it was near the surface, I would say about 5.5, 6 years old, and the pain was so excruciating, even with the local anesthetic, they had to stop the procedure because it was not going to let them take it out.
Right. So, from that experience, it has led you today, like many people, on this mission to find out what the truth is of what's going on.
It has absolutely been a mission, and in fact, I had to look at the technology that was utilized by NASA in order to get to this point. And I took NASA's technology and I applied massive amounts of steroids to it to get results which are easily confirmed with data that's being filmed right now on board the space station. So we're looking at confirmation of extraterrestrial spacecrafts entering into our airspace. And NASA's known about this since the 1990s, and it's consistent with the data that they had since the 1990s. And I can show you samples from 1990 and samples that I have from 2 weeks ago that are exactly the same, and samples from 1960 and samples from 3 nights ago that are exactly the same. So we know these objects are still here. It's not like a new car where they're going to change to spacecraft. Spacecraft generally stay the same.
Right. So these objects are materializing in the airspace of Washington, D.C.
Well, yes, it is. I'm in P53 restricted airspace, and that is designated for buildings such as the White House, the U.S. Capitol building, government buildings, the FBI building, things of that nature. And I'm in P53 restricted airspace. And on a nightly basis, including last night and this morning, I get samples which are consistent with the anomalies that I documented initially in Area 51 while filming my big redneck vacation for country music television. And we're getting these objects in high definition with the new 4K cameras that I'm using right now. And I'm still getting these comments associated to that where people, again, I'm having to mention, want to believe these extraterrestrial spacecraft look like spacecraft that are on Star Wars. And that is not the case.
Right. Now, when did you start to film all of these objects? When did it start for you?
Initially, when I was hired to do my big redneck vacation with Riley Martin, which passed away not too long ago. And they sent us to Area 51. And while filming at the perimeter of Area 51, the crew, along with the rednecks, decided to walk along the perimeter, and I went in another direction into the desert and set up my camera and started taking pictures of the sky, not the base, but I was more interested in what was above my head than what's coming down to the ground. And as I set up my camera, I was quickly, everything was done very quickly, and I had my camera on the tripod. I snapped an equivalent to 8 continuous photographs, which with a D4 Nikon, which was 9 frames per second. It's a small, low-rate motion picture. And in the frames that I documented were these objects that looked like sperm cells that was slithering in space, and they slithered like snakes, and they materialized based on the material that I was able to gather photographically in terms of the physical evidence. But one of the objects communicated telepathically to me to tell me to pack my gear and leave immediately. So when I got the message, I was stunned by that message. So needless to say, I packed my gear and I left immediately. And within 1 minute of leaving immediately, there was an Area 51 security van with a machine gun mounted on the top, headed to the location where I was standing. and my film crew, which was BBC at the time, was arrested face down in the dirt, execution style, with M16s pointed at their head, and an M16 is a military assault rifle.
That's
and they
scary.
were going to kill these people, yes,
that's
without
scary.
a doubt. So they took their equipment, they took the video, gave them the equipment back, took the digital cards were in their cameras, which I believe at the time they were using the Sony camera, which had the Blu-ray disc inside it, which was a high-definition broadcast quality motion picture camera. So they took the disc data out of the cameras and let them go at some point. I think they were fined, but the extraterrestrials had warned me to get out of the area immediately. Then followed me to the hotel, which I was staying, which was 100 miles from Area 51, and they materialized on video as I instructed them to. I said, okay, show yourself to me, and they did. They appeared on video as I demanded they would.
My God. And you say that NASA know all of this. They know what's...
NASA knew about all of this essentially when the Russian space station Mir was in orbit. They were getting documented footage of objects that materialized over both the North Magnetic Pole and South Magnetic Pole. Now think about it. We're dealing with a planet that has a magnetic field, and that magnetic field is associated to both the North and South poles. But this planet is rotating, so that means the magnetic field associated to the planet is also rotating. When you spin a magnet, you get what essentially is a generator. It creates energy. What NASA documented on board Mir was this area in which these objects, which were streaks of light, which they described as a streak of light spacecraft, would materialize in space and fly into Earth's atmosphere, and they documented the reverse, where the objects would leave Earth's atmosphere and dematerialize in space in the area in which they materialized into. So essentially, what Kip Thorne, who's with Caltech, I believe, speculated based on that data is that in those regions of space, there are wormholes associated to both the north and south magnetic fields of the Earth.
Okay. Hold that thought, Wilbur. We're going to talk about this again in a few minutes, but we just need to go to break, and we will be right back. The Tracie Austin Show would like to thank our sponsor, Zohar Stargate TV. And for more information about our sponsor, please visit zoharstargate.com. So just before the break, we were talking to Wilbur about NASA and what NASA knows of these extraterrestrial craft that are materializing and flying around in our airspace. Wilbur, what do people say to you? Do they believe the footage that you're taking and the photographs that you're taking?
Not at all. You know, it's kind of strange. I get people telling me, oh, they're shooting stars. Now, let's look at the definition of a shooting star, and let's also look at the fact that the sun that we rotate around is a star also, and it's not shooting. You know, the definition of a shooting star is a particle of some sort, and it illuminates itself as it enters into our airspace, and it shows itself as a streak of light, and that's what they see as a shooting star. But the objects that I'm getting are streaks of light that are moving, not just the streak of light itself entering into the atmosphere. And what's even more interesting is the data that was out there since the 1960s, especially with Grumman ground satellite tracking technology, which documented this object in the 1960s. Essentially, their analysis was that it was some kind of vapor trail that was moving around, that people were seeing on the ground. They were seeing moving around in space, but my data clearly indicates it's not a vapor trail at all. It's a luminous spacecraft.
Right. Right, and your photographs are very, very interesting. Your footage is very interesting. These objects are matching a couple of incidents that were going on in Grumman, around Grumman in 1960, like you said, and also with Phobos 1 and 2. And you've pretty much uncovered a big lie here with your research, haven't you?
Well, it's even more compelling because what I was given from my associate, who was Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was the lunar module pilot for Apollo 14, was his EVA-1 footage, which was a camera that was set up on a lunar surface as he was conducting his research. And as the camera was running, what they said was a flare was imaged by the EVA camera, and it showed this long streak of light materialize, stay stationary, and then dematerialize. Now keep in mind, if it was a flare of some sort, it would have a tracer element associated to it, where you see
Right.
where its originating points are.
Yep.
And the footage that I'm getting with a Nikon D5 camera, which is state-of-the-art 4K, 4 million ISO, which enables me to film at 60 frames per second, shows that these objects are materializing into the airspace. They're not flying into it, they materialize into it. I've got several samples which show, if you look at the footage clearly, it would show a clear airspace, and then all of a sudden there's the object that materializes.
Right.
Then it goes.
So it's coming through a wormhole.
Yes, it is a portal.
Right.
Which NASA says was initially associated with the Bermuda and Alaska triangles. What NASA's not saying, though, is these spatial anomalies exist everywhere, not just the Bermuda and Alaska triangles.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we're showing the photo of that particular area right now in Grumman. We're showing that right now. Phobos, the Phobos program, was an unmanned space mission consisting of 2 probes, and as you know, they were launched by the Soviet Union to study Mars and its 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos. Now, this was in July of 1988. So we're showing the photos of that right now. Just talk us through these photos, Will, if you will, of Phobos 1 and 2, the UFO objects that we're seeing.
What happened was, prior to Phobos 2 being destroyed by the Band of Light UFO, which it photographed near Phobos, and if you look at the photograph itself, the anomaly is almost as large as the moon itself. And that the footage, according to the experts that analyzed it, was a glitch associated to the camera. But wait a minute. Here I'm using various levels of night vision, full color night vision camera technology, starting with the Nikon D4 and up to a Nikon D5. And even with the D4 Nikon and the D4S Nikon and the D5 Nikon, I'm getting these same streaks of light. So they can't be associated to a defect associated to the camera, and it can't be a defect associated to the camera technology used by Dr. Edgar Mitchell during Apollo 14. So essentially the data is saying without a doubt that these objects, especially what was imaged by Phobos 2, which was his final image prior to being destroyed, shows without a doubt that these large spacecraft, which are, in my opinion, based on the data that I'm able to get, at least 5 to 6 aircraft carriers in length,
Wow.
not 2 to 3 aircraft carriers based on Flight 1628 and Japan Airlines in 1986. They're much larger.
Right.
And that they are here. And I've got enough samples, not just with my technology, but third-party materials, camera crews which are filming for TV shows, kids in airplanes with their little cell phone cameras photographing this streak of light,
Right.
which is now, without a doubt, forensically authenticated.
Right, and what I want to show our audience right now is some video footage of the Russian cosmonaut Maria Popovich, and she is showing this object that is heading towards the Mars moon, Phobos. So take a look at this. It's pretty old footage, so it might be a little bit, wobbly on the sound, but I think you'll understand what we're trying to show you here. So take a look at this.
A long spell of silence followed until, in December 1991, former cosmonaut trainee and retired Soviet Air Force Colonel Marina Popovich held a surprise press conference at the Russian consulate in San Francisco, where she showed off this photograph reportedly taken by one of the Phobos craft. It shows in the foreground a strange shape, which Marina Popovich called an unidentified flying object, what we refer to as a UFO, clearly set off against what appears to be Mars moonlit Phobos in the background. So, what about the mysterious shadow? Well, the Russians said it turned up all of a sudden, that it was something that shouldn't have been there, a shadow of some object above the Martian surface. But that's not all. In April 1992, as we examined these other images, all taken within minutes from each other, we discovered that the shadow had actually been moving.
Okay, Wilbur, let me ask you, we're going to look at some of your photographs in a second because you've been taking some amazing photographs. Have you spoken to any of the astronauts about this particular incident of the photos and footage that you've been filming?
Well, I've got friends, and few of my friends are indeed Apollo astronauts. Edgar Mitchell, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, before he passed away, was a good friend of mine. And I've got astronauts, which I had to utilize because of their expertise and the fact that they did encounter or document the objects that I'm showing that I've captured with my cameras. So we have two levels of documentation here. We have documentation from the Apollo moon mission program, and then we have documentation starting with 35 millimeter high definition film technology all the way to the type of technology that I'm using right now, which shows without a doubt the same objects. Over the course of years, they didn't change, they're here, and the physical documentation associated to them clearly indicates that their presence is definitely known, and the government knows about these, especially dealing with the footage that Grumman captured in the 1960s.
Right. Well, we're going to have a look at a photo here. It's the Apollo 14, where we're seeing the astronauts. Can you just talk us through that for a moment, Wilbur?
It's an EVA, and it's film footage. The camera that they used, I believe, was filming 16 frames per second. So it's very limited motion picture, but motion picture nevertheless of the event that was taking place during EVA-1. And as Dr. Mitchell and the other astronaut are performing their research in space, this luminous, what they said was a flare, appeared on the camera and the film itself. But when we analyzed the camera and seeing how their camera's filming at 16 frames per second, it says that there should be 16 frames associated to every second of that object on that footage, and there are 16 frames of frames associated to that object, which indicates it was there and recorded by the camera, and not a defect associated to the camera, which they said was a film glitch, which is the excuse most people are trying to use, the naysayers, to try to debunk valid materials and evidence such as Dr. Mitchell's EVA-1.
Right. And we're just showing a photo here as well to prove the same thing. This very same object, this band of light that is showing up over the Earth. Let's take a look at some of your photos now, Wilbur. Now, you've been getting this band of light, as you call it, in a lot of your photos, and it sure does look like what we've seen in the Phobos
It's
photos.
exactly what's in the Phobos footage.
Exactly.
But what's interesting is the samples that I have are higher definition. They're more scientific grade in a sense that here I can show you at 60 frames per second an object materialize, not fly, but materialize into the airspace and then fly forward, versus as one would perceive a shooting star or a meteor flying into the atmosphere, which is traceable, and then diminishing as it comes down to Earth. These objects are not diminishing, they're just maintaining a linear trajectory and flight path as they materialize into the airspace.
And as we're talking, we're showing the photos of various bands of light. We're going through a few photos
Keep in mind, these pictures are taken with conventional lenses like 24 millimeter, a 50 millimeter, an 85 millimeter, a 200 millimeter. Anyone that knows anything about photography knows these lenses are specifically designed for close proximity. They're not designed for spatial or terrestrial scanning. They're designed for things that are within the proximity of the lens. Its configuration, its design. So I'm getting these objects in close proximity. I'm also getting the objects with sounds associated to them. There's no distortions associated to them. Generally speaking, if they were outer atmosphere, they would have optical distortions associated to them, which the samples I have do not. They're in high definition.
Right. So why do you think, Wilbur, we are seeing these same objects in these photos?
The frequency of the matter clearly indicates that there is a strong presence of this technology in my airspace. My conclusion is, first, there's a portal, which I've definitely proven. Second, there's also a cloaked mothership, which I can also prove. And third, the trajectory associated to these objects are either all headed towards the White House or the U.S. Capitol building.
Right. Now, are you filming just in Washington, or are you getting these elsewhere in other areas?
Initially, as mentioned earlier, my initial documentation of the object was in Area 51. The second documentation of the object was in Sedona, Arizona, where it communicated with me telepathically, instructing me to set up my camera and film it materialize into the airspace, which I did. It also instructed me to film it dematerialize out of the airspace, which I did. A lot of people don't seem to consider, how am I getting this? And a lot of people want to claim that I'm doing it with CGI, but wait a minute, this isn't CGI.
Right, right. And as we're talking, we're just showing a photo here of the same band of light that is going into the volcano or coming out of the volcano,
Same footage, it's the same thing. And when I analyzed my footage, and I analyzed the footage from the volcano, and there's Martian rover footage which shows the same thing on Mars, it's the same object. Except I got it in high definition and in Earth, not in space. Not anywhere else.
So wait a minute. Now you're saying that Mars, rover on Mars, is also picking up the same object?
They're not letting people know that, but absolutely, yes. The footage is out there.
Because I haven't seen that footage.
It's there. I've got it on a page. And initially, see, we have to deal with credibility issues and people who post certain things. And, you know, I look at materials posted by Secure Team, for example. And Secure Team is showing materials consistent with what I'm getting. But there are people who say Secure Team is a fraud. So if Secure Team is a fraud, then I'm a fraud, because the data that we're showing is exactly the same. But I'm not a fraud.
Right. Where could we go to see that footage? Where could our audience go to see this footage from Mars with rover?
You can go to my website, ufodc.com, and you can click on several things. One of the things you should try to search is a lecture I did in New Jersey. So you type in UFODC New Jersey lecture, and it'll take you to my page, which I also posted to Secure Team's footage.
Okay.
I also have it on the Band of Light Forensic Files page, which I had to include it, even though people want to say and discredit the people at Secure Team. The data that they're showing is indeed 100% credible, and I'm having a problem with people such as MUFON claiming that materials off of a cell phone would be generated from a CGI technology, but yet they can't tell me the CGI technology which generated the effect. So stop using CGI as a bias and claiming things are CGI when things could be actually valid forensic samples, especially coming off of a cell phone.
Right, and CGI wouldn't be possible on a cell phone?
Impossible on a cell phone level. Impossible. I teach or taught CGI technology at Howard University at a graduate school level, and I know exactly how CGI technology works. And I can say as an expert that most of the samples that I post are not CGI, but people at MUFON who claim to be experts without educational background will say that they are CGI. So who would you believe, a person that's trained educationally or some guy that pays $4.99 a month to say he's an expert at UFO technology?
Okay. Wilbur, we are coming to the close of the show, and listen, I've got to have you back on the show because there is so much more stuff we've got to cover here, and I want to show.
There's a ton of stuff. We didn't even touch the iceberg.
Right. So you will come back to see us? Perfect. Your website, in the meantime, what is the? Is
ufodc.com. There are 64,000 samples on my website. You want to definitely check out Wilbur Allen's YouTube channel, which is my YouTube channel. I specifically deal with forensic files. There's no CGI, no Photoshop, as people say, is applied to video, which is impossible. It is straight raw video processed in Avid Media Composer technology. There is no collusion, no joke, no fraudulent data associated to anything that I post. All the data is in high definition.
Okay. Well, thank you, Wilbur. Folks, we have come to the end of our show. I want you to stay tuned because we are going to have Wilbur back on the show, and we're going to find out more about these photographs of these very interesting phenomena that he's filming in the airspace over Washington, D.C. So in the meantime, please do check out our website, thetraciaustenshow.com. We're also on Twitter, where you can follow us, Facebook and Instagram, and we will see you real soon. The Tracie Austin Show would like to thank our sponsor, Zohar Stargate TV. And for more information about our sponsor, please visit zoharstargate.com.